So continuing our short video lecture regarding the honeybee colony collapse disorder, we're going to be looking at a graphic that depicts the percentage of crops pollinated by honeybees and the value of those crops. So as you can see by this chart, the honeybee is the most commercial pollinator worldwide and the most efficient. We rely on bees for 90 to 100% of the pollination of crops like almonds, depicted here, blueberries, listed here, about 90% pollinated by honeybees, and apples, 90% pollinated by honeybees. These are valued, the apples are valued at $2 billion, blueberries at $500 million, and then the almonds at $2 billion. So we have some major monetary investments in almonds, apples, and blueberry crops that rely upon natural pollination by honeybees. This bar chart over here, the green just indicates the percentage of pollination due to honeybees, and the tan indicates the percentage of pollination due to other species. So some unusual and interesting points about what's going on with the colony collapse disorder. There are actual places where people are being paid to do the bee's job and move pollen from flower to flower by using a paintbrush. Interesting enough, honeybees can pollinate 3 million flowers every day just from one hive. A human can hand pollinate less than 30 small trees in one day. So there is literally no competition in the efficiency of pollination between a hive of honeybees and people. This proves that humans are extremely inefficient compared to honeybees, and human pollination is actually occurring in China. The reason China is paying people to do hand pollination is because pesticides in parts of China completely wiped out all the bees in certain areas. The villagers are hand pollinating their crops as a substitute for the bees, and they basically have to hand collect the pollen, let it dry, and then germinate it. So here's the deal. If we lost all the honeybees in the United States, it would cost us $90 billion per year to replace the bees and have humans hand pollinate. It's just not a feasible solution. Our reliance on honeybees is just unmistakable. So some pros and cons with what's going on here. The pros of this is that we've identified the problem. We are researching the honeybee hive collapse numbers, and we recognize the importance of the honeybee to our agricultural industry. So those are some of the pros. Research is ongoing, trying to find the root cause of the problem and trying to figure out solutions to resolve this. Some other pros are that people are being encouraged to beekeep. State agencies are providing training seminars to people that want to have their own honeybee hives, and also encouraging people to plant gardens with native plants that are pollinated by honeybees that help boost the population of the honeybees. So these are some pros. The cons I've already mentioned: loss of biodiversity, loss of food, huge monetary issue in the agricultural system, commercial farming, and then the ripple effect of impacting ecosystems. And that's because bees are very entwined within the ecosystem and can have an impact if their populations get to be too low. So another documentary that you're welcome to watch on your own is titled More Than Honey. It's a 2013 documentary, a little bit more recent in terms of data in reference to the colony collapse disorder. And the link's on the screen, but I'm also going to include it in the D2L content with the short video lecture series so that you can access it and watch it if you want to. So that wraps up having a better understanding of what's going on with the colony collapse disorder and our honeybee population. And as I mentioned, it's multifaceted in terms of what the cause is, but it does seem like the neonicotinoid pesticides are one of the root issues with it, in addition to the Varroa destructor mite. Okay, we're going to switch gears and talk about bats now. And we're looking at bats as a native species here in the United States and a fungus that is attacking our bat population. It's called the white nose syndrome. It's a psychrophilic fungus that is impacting our bat population. It's not a native fungus to the United States. It was discovered in 2006 in a cave in New York. Currently, there are over 900 bat species and estimates of 1,200 species, making them 1/5 of our mammal population. So we're still identifying various bat species. This fungus, we're not quite sure exactly how it's killing the bats, but it does affect the bats during hibernation cycle. And we're recognizing that the bats are having depleted fat reserves and are forced to wake up from their hibernation and go out and find food during the winter. The problem is during the winter, when they leave the cave to hunt, there's no insects around because the insects have migrated to warmer regions or they've gone through their life cycle and have frozen and died off. So it's much harder to feed on insects during the winter for the bats. And as a result, the bats are coming out trying to feed and being woken up by this fungus, and they're expending more energy. And when they come back to the cave to hibernate, they get weakened and they end up starving to death, basically. In the past decade, it's estimated that 5.7 million bats have died as a result of the white nose syndrome. Once the fungus is discovered in a cave, about 90% of the bats will die within the next year or two. Now, as far as bats feeding on insects, bats are amazing hunters. They can eat 1,000 mosquitoes in an hour, an individual bat. It's estimated that every million bats that died were likely to consume over 694 tons of disease-ridden mosquitoes and crop pests. In temperate regions, bats are the primary consumers of insects. And a recent economic analysis indicates that insect suppression services provided by the bats to the U.S. agriculture is valued between $4 to $50 billion per year. So this species also is related to our agriculture industry, and they help control the pests that eat our crops. So, as mentioned earlier, why are they being affected? Well, more than half of the 47 bat species living in the United States hibernate to survive the winter. There are 11 cave hibernating bats, including 4 that are actually endangered species, and 1 species that was recently proposed for listing on the Environmental Endangered Species Act. There are 2 nectar-feeding bats, the lesser long-nosed bat and the Mexican long-tongued bat, that migrate north for thousands of miles or more every spring from Mexico into Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. Both of these species are federally listed endangered species under the Endangered Species Act. Besides the benefit that bats help reduce insect populations and insects that could harm crops, bats are also considered pollinators. Over 300 species of fruit depend on bats for pollination. Some of these fruits include mangoes, bananas, and guava, as well as the kapok tree and the areca palm tree. Specific to Pennsylvania, the Indiana bat is considered an endangered species. There are over 1,000 bats that hibernate in Pennsylvania in 11 counties, and this is a population of bats that we research and keep an eye on in regards to their numbers. Overall, there are 11 bat species in Pennsylvania. At the bottom of your screen is a link to the Nature Conservancy video. This is a great video that describes what's going on with the white nose fungus virus and what some researchers are doing to try to solve the problem associated with it. Please be sure to take time to go to this week's lesson content and find this short video to watch about what's going on with the white nose fungus virus and the bat populations. This map depicts where the white nose syndrome has spread throughout the United States. Please take note that the first detected occurrence of the white nose syndrome or the fungus was discovered in Schoharie County, New York in 2006, as indicated by the red circle. In 2007 and 2008, the gray areas are areas that have detected and confirmed that the white nose syndrome was present in caves. In 2008 and 2009, we're looking at the purple and the pink. So you can see how we are detecting it further away from New York as more time goes on. In 2009 and 2010, it's the blue areas where it's been detected. And in 2010 and 2011, it's the red and orange areas where the white nose syndrome has been detected in bat caves. Bat species in this region that have been confirmed with the white nose syndrome include the big brown bat, the eastern small-footed bat, the gray bat, the Indiana bat, which is considered an endangered species in Pennsylvania, the little brown bat, the northern long-eared bat, and the tricolored bat. This map is very similar to the prior slide that I showed you. However, the data extends into 2011-2012, and it depicts confirmed occurrences of the white nose syndrome and areas that are considered to be suspect of the white nose syndrome. So what have we learned so far? Research biologists are definitely digging into the topic of white nose syndrome and its impact on bats. Biologists in New York and Vermont have found up to 50% of the marked little brown bats at test sites surviving from one winter to the next in recent years, which gives them some hope that this species might one day be able to recover and be resilient to the white nose syndrome. Little brown bat populations at these sites remain less than 10% of their pre-white nose syndrome exposure. However, scientists are looking at ways to develop treatments for bat caves as well as apply to bats in order to make them resistant to the white nose syndrome. The ways that scientists use to detect if white nose syndrome is present in these caves is they're using a Pseudomonas destructant on bats in that environment, which means they're using a UV light and a molecular analysis to determine whether or not white nose syndrome is present. Because of this white nose syndrome research, researchers have discovered new unrelated bat disease agents, and researchers have made significant strides in understanding the disease response in hibernating bats and the factors that influence the bat vulnerability to the white nose syndrome. Studies pertaining to natural bacteria and skin chemistry of bats have led to new lines of research for treating the bats using biological or non-chemical agents in order to reduce the risk of that bat to the white nose syndrome. So there's a lot of research going on right now trying to troubleshoot and find resolution to this problem because it is having such a dire impact on our bat populations. This map again is very similar to the two previous slides, but notice the data shows through 2015-2016. And if you go back to the previous slides, you're going to notice that there's been a trend of white nose syndrome expanding westward. So this is up through 2011, and it's primarily located here in the Appalachian Mountain region with a few occurrences in Indiana. Then with the 2012 data, we have more occurrences in the Indiana, and we're seeing a further westward spread of the white nose syndrome. And as of 2015-2016, look at the increased confirmations of white nose syndrome, even extending into the Great Lakes and Canada region, and we have a suspect occurrence of it in Washington State. This begs the question as to how is this white nose syndrome moving westward? What's causing it to go from where it was originally detected here in New York all the way west into Indiana, as far west as Washington State? And there's a few things here. One is that bats do migrate, and as a result of that, they can fly, I think, 1,000 miles within an evening. And as a result of that, if they have exposure themselves, they can carry that exposure into a new cave that doesn't actually have the white nose syndrome. The other way that the white nose syndrome is being spread is by people that do caving. And the white nose syndrome gets onto the clothes of people, and they go from one cave to the next without decontaminating their clothing or their shoes. And as a result, it's spreading that way. In fact, this first occurrence here in New York is said to have come from human introduction by people that have been caving in Europe area where the white nose syndrome is present, but the bats are resilient to it. And through their cave clothes, when they came and did some caving in New York, it showed up as being present, and since then it's spread from New York to other areas as depicted on this map. So our bat population is definitely one to keep an eye on in the future.